Maintenon, who, legend has it, was born on the banks of the river. The town's church, Our Lady of Assumption, is considered an architectural masterpiece. It was designed and built by the Reverend Father Leroy in 1928 with enthusiastic help from the congregation. The Sinamari River is the 5th longest in French Guiana, and fishing is understandably an important activity here. Numerous birds gather in the estuary, where the mangrove swamps are teeming with wildlife. And there's our drone flying, hovering over the launch pad there. You can just see it in the distance, get a really good image there of the Amazon rainforest, because that's where we are, of course, on the edge of the Amazon rainforest and the northeastern coast of South America. Now, you could think of our launcher as almost two separate parts, if you like. We've got the first 3 stages, which is called the powered phase of the flight, which gets us into space. And then on the top, it has something called the frigate upper stage. So we actually have 2 synchronized sequences for those 2 parts.
Attention pour H0, moins 10 minutes et 20 secondes.
And this is the range operations manager. 2 parts.
Début de la séquence finale lanceur.
And he has just announced the final phase of the synchronized sequence for the launch vehicle. So this means that the computers on the ground are running all the operations. They run an extremely impressive list of operations because it's all automated. And you can see there on the right-hand side what we call these status panels. All the systems across the base send their flight readiness status to those panels. And obviously they're a little bit like traffic lights. Green is go, and of course red is stop. And right now we are go for launch. They are giving us information on vital things like the state of the launch base, the safeguarding and telemetry, as well as weather and that sort of thing. Now, the Soyuz rocket is actually built in Russia and shipped, I believe, to French Guiana in 10 crates, and teams then set about assembling and mating the satellites. This is called the launch campaign.
The Soyuz V21 launch campaign began in early September 2018 and continued until December. On December 20, we transferred the frigate upper stage from the Soyuz launcher preparation building MIG to the F-Cube fueling facility in early January. Filling operations started at the F-Cube building in parallel. We also began launcher assembly as well as preparations at the launch zone ahead of the launch.
The VS21 flight will be the first launch for the OneWeb Satellites company. The launch campaign has started with the arrival of the Antonov cargo plane on the 22nd of January. The 6 spacecraft and 4 mass flight simulators were transferred to S3B payload facilities with ground support equipment. Combined operations with launchers item have started right after the arrival on the 23rd of January with mass flight simulator mating on dispenser. In parallel, last electrical checks were performed on the 6 spacecraft and integration on dispenser has started on the 29th of January.
On February 18, the filled frigate was transferred from F-Cube to the S3B building.
The stack, made of spacecraft and mass flight simulators integrated on dispenser, was transferred onto the frigate stage on the 19th of February. The nose module, made of payloads, dispenser and frigate stage, under fairing, was transferred to the Soyuz launch pad and hoisted onto launcher on the 22nd of February.
At D-2 was the launcher rehearsal. At D-1, in parallel with the frigate rehearsal, the launch readiness review gave the green light for the launch operations to go ahead. Today, the final chronology operations are underway for a launch at 18:37 local time.
And here I am back in my commentary box. I've now come upstairs and watching the launch from the Mission Control Center. The commentary box is above the screens, and there is our vehicle on the pad, Soyuz, waiting for liftoff. And we also see images back there of the Jupiter Control Center, and these are the OneWeb teams. These guys and girls all know each other well. They've been working together very closely on this mission, some of them for months and some of them for years. And Andreas de Oliveira there is in charge of the launch for OneWeb. And here is the Minister for Solidarity and Health, Agnès Buzyn, who is watching the launch, the French minister there. Getting closer now to the next final phase of the synchronized sequence. You remember I said we had 2 synchronized sequences, and getting closer to that. And the teams who are watching over all these operations are in what we call the Launch Control Center, and here they are, can see them in action. They are monitoring frigate's transfer to onboard power at this point in time. We have various teams working in here, one responsible for the ground operations, led by the launch site operations manager, and their counterpart on the Russian side, because of course Soyuz is a Russian launcher. And the other team's responsible for the flight readiness of the vehicle, led by the production manager. And the beginning of the final synchronized sequence, the 5 is about 5 minutes beforehand, and it's called Kluch na Start. And in the control center in Kazakhstan, there's actually a key which is turned to trigger that sequence, and key is Kluch, I believe, in Russian, and key on start is Kluch na Start. That white smoke you can see there coming out of the side of the launcher is it's the liquid oxygen which is burning off. Now, our drone is flying over here. We're looking at one of the viewing sites. This is called Colibri. It's the closest viewing site to the launch pad, and everybody there has got the front row seats for this launch, and I hope they've taken their mosquito spray with them, because as you could see back there, we are on the edge of the Amazon rainforest, and this is the time when the mosquitoes come out, I'm afraid to say. This is, we were looking back there at Joël Egalgi, who is the range operations manager. He calls out all the major events during the flight. Getting a really good image there of the launcher lit up. Bit cloudy there. A word about the final launch sequence. We're going to see, can you see those swing arms at the bottom? We've got 4 blue and yellow arms clamping onto the bottom of the launcher. And they have big weights, counterweights at the bottom of them, those yellow structures. We'll see those move away just before launch. Our satellites are inside there, waiting patiently for launch in first class. It's nice and cool in there. They've got air conditioning. And the mast on the right-hand side is...
Largage des ombilicaux, ciao.
Well, he's just announced the mast is containing what we call the umbilical lines. Those are the feed lines going up from the top of the rocket to the ground, and those have just been detached, and they fall into a basket which you can't see. You can't see them because they're inside the mast, but you'll see that mast and the one below it pull away just before the launch. Also, a quick word about the launch sequence. We switched the engines on 16 minutes before liftoff at 16 seconds rather. And the reason for that is we need to check that they are working well. So we throttle them up slowly, and we increase the thrust slowly, and when they reach full thrust, the rocket lifts off. Nothing can hold it back, and those swing arms pivot away. Looking very relaxed in there. Everybody's done this many, many times before. Getting closer now to the 1 minute mark.
À tous de DDO, attention pour moins 1 minute. Top, H0 moins 1 minute.
And we are 1 minute to launch. We're orbiting the first 6 satellites in the brand new OneWeb constellation built by the Airbus OneWeb Satellites joint venture. And we're flying on board the 21st Soyuz to launch from the Guyana Space Center. Our very best wishes now to all the teams.
Largage du Mac AZM. À tous de DDO, attention pour le début de la séquence d'allumage lanceur. Top, H0 moins 20 secondes. Largage du VKM. Allumage triétage. À tous de DDO. Attention pour le décompte final. 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, top. Et décollage VS21, OneWeb F6. Paramètres à bord sont normaux. La propulsion est conforme à l'attendu.
And they are off. The first 6 OneWeb satellites have begun their journey, heading out north over the Atlantic towards the Caribbean. Look at that. Those engines on board Soyuz are pushing hard against Earth's gravity. We're burning 5 engines at the moment.
Tous les paramètres à bord sont normaux.
He's telling us that everything on board's going according to plan. And we've got 5 engines. We've got 1 on the main stage. We've got 4 on each one of those boosters. But it's the boosters that are doing all the work right now. Oh, look at that streak of light heading out across the skies here at the Guyana Space Center, out over the Atlantic Ocean. The boosters only burn for 2 minutes, but that's long enough for Soyuz to escape the pull of our planet. They're delivering 80% of our thrust right now.
Les paramètres propulsifs sont conformes.
And if we're lucky, we might see them falling away. I think we're going to see them being jettisoned. Look out for 4 dots. There we go. There they go. Look how they twist and turn. That's all part of the plan. Very beautiful sight, actually, to see that with the cameras. And now what we're left with...
Séparation des blocs BVGD confirmée.
He's told us that that's been confirmed. You can see that's what it looks like from in space. So they've burnt all their fuel. We don't need them anymore. And we are burning the main core stage, the Block A. And if you take a look...
Bonne stabilisation du lanceur suite à la séparation.
He's telling us that it's good stabilization after the separation there of those boosters. And you take a look at the front of the launcher, that's actually called the fairing, as I mentioned earlier.
Du bloc A est conforme.
And he's saying everything's going well. And the satellites are in there. And indeed, that fairing has been protecting our satellites. It protects us from the rigors of the launch. a number of things it needs to protect us from, notably the acoustic vibrations at liftoff. It's very loud, I'm sure you can imagine. It's also protecting us from friction, because as we fly through the dense part of the atmosphere, that creates a lot of friction on the outside, and that creates heat, of course. As we get higher up, the air gets thinner, and we have less and less friction. And if you look at the bottom left-hand side of your screen, you can see we are 116 kilometers above Earth. So we've gone above what we call the Kármán line. That's the border with space. So effectively, we don't really need our fairing anymore, because we hardly have any friction, certainly not enough for it to be a problem, and so we can jettison it. This is the scheduled moment for jettisoning the fairing, and that's what it looks like from cameras on board a previous launcher. And he's confirmed that we have that separation. Now, if you have ever wondered how satellites work, how they get the internet to you, and how we all get connected, then you're in luck, because a man who knows is David Nemeth from OneWeb, and David is with me now. David, thank you very much for joining us.
Hi, Katie. I'm so happy to be here.
David, you're the Director of Systems Modelling at OneWeb. In a nutshell, what does that mean?
So my team is responsible for doing really detailed models of the satellites flying and connecting to ground stations and connecting the users, and really making sure that we've got the capacity that we want and that we know how to run the system properly.
Very important work. And we're coming up now on the scheduled separation of the next stage. We use a hot stage technique on Soyuz, which means we switch on the engine of the third stage before we separate the second stage. And more cameras there on a previous launch showing us.
Allumage bloc I, extinction bloc A et séparation.
And we have the confirmation there from the range operations manager. So we are now burning the third stage, and that's what it looks like. David, you can see your satellites for the first time. Can you talk through for us what we're looking at?
So what we're seeing here is the dispenser, which has 4 rings, which would, in this design, mount 32 satellites. We're launching 6 today, plus 6 mass frequency simulators. And the first 2 satellites you saw were at the top there. Those are going to be the first 2 to be ejected. The dispenser, the shape of the satellites are sort of a trapezoid, and they fit around.
I'm just going to stop you for a second with trapezoid. Now, can we imagine a triangle and cut the top off?
Very much like it. One way to think of it is like corn on the cob, and that's like the and it's wider at the top. And the satellites were actually designed that way so that we could efficiently put them in the dispenser and still use the most volume possible for our design. So with your corn on the cob analogy, then, the tube that we were looking at back there in the middle is the dispenser. So the tube is the corn. The tube is the cob. The tube is the cob, which we will throw away when we're done. And the kernels are the satellites, which are we launching off now into space, and which will start providing service for us. Our team's looking very relaxed in there. The OneWeb teams, we're looking inside here, the Mission Control Center inside the fishbowl, given that it's got glass all the way around it. Just a reminder that we have the information on the screen there. Now, this is a replay we're going to look at. It happened, we lifted off, 7 minutes ago from the pad, David. I sent David outside to watch it from the terraces, because you can't come here and not watch it with your own eyes. What was it like, David? So I saw the satellite sitting on the ground earlier, and just now as I was outside, there was a fair bit of cloud cover, but we got a good view of it coming up initially and seeing the very, very bright flames coming out of the back. And it's an emotional experience. I mean, the experience is one of something we've been anticipating for a long time, and it's really exciting. But to see it going up is it's like a relief. We've arrived at a point. I know we have a lot to go, but it's a really happy to see it sent off on its way. And you saw the launcher with the satellites inside. As you said, you saw that on the pad earlier today. That must have been quite emotional as well. That was extraordinary. When they take you on the bus to see the satellite, you don't see it until the very end. You sort of come around the back, and then you see the open... to see the launcher, you mean? The launcher, right. You come around the back, and the doors are open on the surrounding building.
And there it is in all its glory. And it was just remarkable to think that all of this building and all of this huge launcher was all for these satellites getting up to where we need them to go.
And of course, with our cameras, we got a very good shot as well of the boosters separating, which I doubt you will have seen with the naked eye. David, we're flying north. Can you just give us a bit of an idea of our flight path today?
Sure. So this satellite's going into a polar orbit, which means that it's going to be flying over the poles. It's going to start off coming up from French Guiana, which is on the equator, up past the east coast of Canada over the North Pole. And then it's going to come down the other side past China, Southeast Asia, through Australia, swing over the South Pole, and then come up again a little bit west of here, because the Earth will have turned a little bit while the satellite has gone around.
So we're tracking the launcher using what we call telemetry. We have telemetry stations or tracking stations picking up the signal. And Bermuda is the station we're using right now. This is the separation now of the third stage. It's burnt its fuel every time each section of the launcher. And we have confirmation there of that separation. Every time the launcher, section of the launcher uses up its... and he is confirming there that we've picked up the signal at the tracking station in Bermuda. So that's good. So we're starting the next phase of the journey now. The frigate upper stage is taking the wheel. It's getting ready to switch its engine on, actually. It's called the pre-burn phase, which means it gives a quick burst of acceleration to push the fluids back into the tanks, and that's to make sure that there's enough propellant in the engine. It's a bit like, isn't it, when you're in a car and you press the accelerator and you get pushed against the seat.
Exactly. I think of it more like it's when you have a bottle of ketchup and the ketchup's not coming out, and then you just get air, and you give it a good shake, and all of the ketchup goes to the front so that you can squeeze it out in this nice, smooth squirt. That's exactly what we're doing with the fuel in the frigate right now.
So the upper stage is taking us, I guess you could think of it as a bit of a kind of clever taxi driver, if you like. It can take its satellites anywhere they want to go. Where is it taking you guys today? So
our initial orbit today, as I said, is a polar orbit. We're going to go up to 1,000 kilometers, and they will be dropped off there. At that point, the OneWeb system the OneWeb flight operations team will take control of them and raise them up to their final orbit of 1,200 kilometers. So they have another 200 kilometers to go after today.
So they've got a bit of a journey, and they'll be doing those 200 kilometers on their own, supported obviously by the teams on the ground. It's all automated. Just a quick run through of what you're looking at on the screen. Top right hand corner, the trajectory, the planned trajectory, and the cross is the actual position. And there on the bottom right is the flight path you can see there that David just talked us through. Now let's see how Arianespace has met the challenge of creating the OneWeb.
Tonight is the Soyuz launch VS21, the second launch of the year, and more importantly, the first launch of the ambitious OneWeb constellation program. VS21 mission is to bring the first 6 OneWeb spacecraft into a low Earth orbit, close to their operational orbit. This Soyuz flight will also embark 4 mass flight simulators mated with the OneWeb F6 spacecraft on an innovative dispenser system specifically designed for OneWeb. The OneWeb F6 satellites have been developed and manufactured by OneWeb Satellites in its serial production line in Toulouse. This first launch is an important milestone for the initial deployment of the OneWeb constellation that will be ensured with 20 other Soyuz launches performed from 3 different launch pads: Kourou in French Guiana, Baikonur in Kazakhstan, and Vostochny in Russia. For Arianespace, the journey began in June 2015 when OneWeb trusted on us to think out of the box for meeting the huge challenge to put in orbit over 600 satellites, with 21 launches of up to 32 spacecraft and to be performed in less than 2 years. I would like to thank all the teams involved in this program, in particular OneWeb and OneWeb Satellites project teams, and also Arianespace team. Constructive and pragmatic approaches with the same common goal have been always preferred for the benefits of this ambitious program. We have performed a really great job since 2015, which will continue throughout the deployment launches phase.
So lots of people involved in this project, David.
Yes, absolutely. And I think now would be a good time to mention that the satellites and the rockets are all what we're looking at today, and that's great stuff. But it wouldn't work without a communication systems, and a lot of design work and a lot of really innovative thinking went in by our key technology partners, Qualcomm and Hughes Network Systems, to build a system that could actually transfer data over these satellites.
Number of people we're looking at here in the audience, Sir Richard Branson, and all watching intently. And yeah, so the speed and altitude, we are now travelling at 194 kilometres. Sorry, we're above the Earth, 194 kilometres altitude. We're travelling at coming up for 8 kilometres per second. 8 kilometres per second, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, not 8 kilometres per minute. That is extremely fast. Now, this coming up to the scheduled moment here, frigate shutting down its engine. This is the scheduled frigate cutoff. We get our confirmations a little bit later because the information needs to go via Moscow. So sometimes it takes a little bit longer, which is perfectly normal. It's all planned that way. Once frigate switches its engine off, we enter what we call the ballistic phase. And ballistic is probably a word I'm guessing that you've heard quite a lot over the years. I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, that it means travelling without propulsion. So we are travelling high enough and fast enough to be able to switch the engine off and cruise without it. Various reasons. And to save on propellant and optimise the conditions. He says all the propulsion parameters are going well. OneWeb's doing a lot of work, important work, changing lives.
Half the world is unconnected. The tendency is to think, wow, the unconnected must be really missing out. But the connected are missing out just as much. What types of culture, traditions, knowledge, and talent is the rest of the world missing out on? OneWeb's mission is to connect all the unconnected schools in the world, and there are many. The reason why we are here in Caracola is because it is so remote and so difficult to get to. Satellite internet is essential if we're going to be connected.
So when I said changing lives, I mean really changing lives. Bringing internet connections into schools must make a huge difference.
So connecting schools has always been one of the missions from the very beginning of OneWeb, one of the very important missions. And in support of that, we have sent emissaries to 6 schools around the world. You saw one of them there. And as part of that program, the children of the schools got to name the first 6 satellites. So we can go online to learn more about where these names come from and what they mean. But the school in Nepal named theirs Sherpa-sat. The school from Honduras named theirs Lempira-sat. The school from Ecuador named it Chusig-sat. The school from Rwanda named it Ikirikezo-sat. The Kyrgyzstan school named it Chingis-sat. And the Alaska school named it
Confirmation de
Nanook
l'extinction
Set,
de l'étage frégate, conformément aux prévisions.
which are much better names than we call them in the engineering side, which are things like F6, F10, and F11.
Well, I have to say, I think those are beautiful names, and congratulations to all of the children who thought of that and worked hard to find lovely names for the 6 satellites. We're in the ballistic phase. We are going to take a break now for about just over 20 minutes and switch off our microphones. We'll be coming back to you in just over 20 minutes at 17 minutes past 7 French Guiana time. That is 17 minutes past 10 Universal time and 17 minutes past 5 in Washington. We'll leave you with a beautiful replay of the launch.
acquisition d'un télémesure par la station de Svalbard. Activation du début du mode barbecue. un nominal de visibilité de la station Svalbard en Norvège. Réacquisition de la télémesure attendue dans 20 minutes environ.
here on Earth. Right now, the 6 satellites are riding bareback on the frigate upper stage, what's left of our launch vehicle, and they are hurtling through space. Now, David Nemeth has been with me in the commentary box. David, you're here on the floor with us as well, so you can actually see him in real life. David, we've got lots of people watching us. Where are your people, OneWeb, watching us from?
So OneWeb has offices all over the world, and we have parties at every one of them. So we have people in London. We have people, shout out to the people in California. We have people in Virginia. There's actually 3 separate offices in Virginia.
And David, this was 41 minutes ago. You saw this, you were standing outside watching it. We watched it on the screens here at the Mission Control Center. It was a really spectacular launch, looking at it from my perspective on the screen. What was it like for you out there?
It was an interesting experience, because in one hand you're saying goodbye, but in the other hand you're saying hello to something, because these satellites have been inert, and they will be inert until they're released. And so though we won't be able to actually see them and touch them again, we'll actually be able to get to know them and interact with them. So it's really exciting to watch it go up and think that I'm actually going to get to meet them for the first time soon.
We've got a great view of the boosters being jettisoned. The boosters are the 4 rockets on the side of the vehicle, and you can see how they twist and turn. This has all been very carefully planned that way. Once we lost the boosters, then the fairing was jettisoned, so our satellites were exposed to space. Then we switched on the 2nd, then the 3rd stage, and we picked up our signal at the Bermuda tracking station, heading north out over towards the poles. Then we switched off the engine on the 3rd stage, and then the next part of the journey began when the frigate upper stage switched its engine on. And we said that frigate is a little bit like a clever taxi driver, takes our satellites wherever they want to go. Frigate then switched its engine off again, and we went into what we call a ballistic phase. Ballistic meaning we are traveling without the engine, and that's precisely what's happening now. Indeed, frigate is also doing something called a barbecue, which means it's twisting as if on a spit, as if on a rotisserie, as you say in American, because why is that?
It's to keep it evenly heated on all, just like a rotisserie. When you're cooking, you want to keep it evenly warmed on all sides, so nothing gets too hot and nothing gets too cold.
So 43 minutes and 10 seconds into the launch. Just give us an overview briefly, David, of what OneWeb actually is.
So OneWeb is a project to provide global connectivity, and what that really means for us is that we need to make a system where wherever you are in the world, when you look up, there's a OneWeb satellite over your head that can provide you service. And it's a constellation of hundreds and hundreds of satellites in 12 planes, and it's a really remarkable thing to have this many satellites providing communication, because what it means is that there's a lot of capacity.
Absolutely. So let's just take a little closer look now at the constellation.
There are nearly 8 billion people living in the world. Can you imagine the opportunities we could create by connecting them all? We can. So we've brought together world-class partners from a range of industries to revolutionize global communications, rapidly progressing from imagining to launching. We've transformed the satellite manufacturing process, producing the most efficient communications satellites yet. We've installed antennas around the world, with more coming every day. And we've built teams with deep knowledge that continue to fuel our progress. As we speed towards global service delivery, we'll continue to hit major milestones along the way, culminating in a global network that delivers low-latency, high-speed connectivity through a constellation of satellites and ground systems by providing accessible broadband quality for everyone, everywhere, for today and tomorrow. We'll change satellite communications for the world, on the water, in the air, and on the ground. OneWeb is going to connect the dreamers, thinkers, doers, everywhere. We're reimagining global communications so the global imagination can be unleashed. Get ready for a new world of connectivity. One world, one web.
One world, one web, access for everyone. It's a big, ambitious, and very, very innovative project. But what makes the OneWeb constellation different from other telecommunications constellations?
So the size, right? The number of satellites we have to have and the amount of infrastructure we have to support it changed not only. It had to change the way we thought about it from the design from the very beginning, right? It has. There was a lot of technology that exists. In a lot of cases, none of it was quite right? So things had to be changed. Things that we knew how to make 10 of, we had to figure out how to make 10,000 of. And so just the scale of the number of satellites we have to produce, the number of launches, the amount of ground infrastructure is simply astounding. And once that exists and comes into existence, we need an equally powerful system to manage it, to track it. We're going to have more information about some of these flight components than anyone else in the world because of the enormous number of flight hours we're going to have because we have so many units up in the sky. So it's a fantastic opportunity not only to provide a great service, but to learn a whole lot about the technology that exists today in a much greater level of detail.
But also, I mean, the huge challenges involved in building something from scratch, something which is brand new, effectively almost from, an idea in somebody's mind.
So exactly, and we had to get a lot of people to think differently about what it is that they normally did in a particular way. That included the way things were designed. It's one thing to build 100 of something every year, but if you're then asked to build 10,000, it's not just enough to hire 100 times as many people as you had before. Exactly. You have to think of a new way to do it, and you have to think of a clever way to do it.
And the people who have been doing that for the first 6 satellites are Airbus OneWeb satellites who've built the first 6. Let's hear from them, from Airbus.
Dear customers, colleagues, partners and friends of the space industry, I'm really excited with the launch of the first satellites of the OneWeb constellation and proud to tell you, yes, we made it. The design and manufacturing of the OneWeb satellites is the next chapter in a new space story and a revolutionary game changer in the space ecosystem. What we've done has never been done before in the space industry. In a record time, Airbus and a joint venture with OneWeb, together with our industrial partners, have designed and produced here in the Airbus facilities in Toulouse the first satellites of the OneWeb constellation.
Well, it looks like we've had a bit of a problem with our film there, which is a shame, but we can talk just a little bit about the manufacturing process, which has been incredibly innovative. You've had to develop, as you were saying before, it's one thing, building a certain small number of satellites, but actually building, it looks like we might be able to go back to our film. Oh, yes, and we have been able to.
I'm really excited with the launch of the first satellites of the OneWeb constellation and proud to tell you, yes, we made it. The design and manufacturing of the OneWeb satellites is the next chapter in a new space story and a revolutionary game changer in the space ecosystem. What we've done has never been done before in the space industry. In a record time, Airbus and a joint venture with OneWeb, together with our industrial partners, have designed and produced here in the Airbus facilities in Toulouse the first satellites of the OneWeb constellation. And this has been enabled by dedicated industrial facilities and solutions for the series manufacturing. Everything is ready for the mass production of several satellites per day. This has really inspired us to develop new mindset in all areas, in design, in equipment supply, and in new approaches for production and test processes. This is real new space. We have successfully combined the innovation and large volume manufacturing techniques from aircraft production together with a big experience in building extremely reliable, high-performance space systems. The agility and flexibility of Team Airbus enables us to continue to be a major player in the rapidly evolving global space market. Airbus is totally engaged with Airbus OneWeb satellites to provide the customers with a high-performance and reliable system connecting the world. Airbus OneWeb satellites will now focus on ramping up production of the full constellation in its new factory in Florida, demonstrating once again agility. And I'm extremely proud of all the teams, Airbus, OneWeb, and the joint venture Airbus OneWeb satellites teams, all our industrial partners who have worked together, sharing know-how, efforts, and a lot of passion to make this new space a reality. Congratulations. This is the end of the beginning.
The beginning. But what happens next, David?
So once these satellites are in our hands, it's time to take all of this communications technology we've developed out of the lab and into the real world and test it over the air on real spacecraft.
And that's a really important phase, of course.
It's a big step because the real world conditions and the lab conditions are never quite the same. And we're doing a lot of stuff with that technology, and it's going to be really exciting to see that all come together.
So we know that there's a big difference between building 1 or 10 satellites to building, say, 600. And as you say, it's the end of the beginning. So let's take a look now at the film called The End of the Beginning.
Technological revolutions begin when it's time to evolve, when the needs of the future change. This story was written by many visionaries. They changed the way we move, the way we communicate, the way we think, and how we lead our lives. And now we're writing our own story, realizing the next technological revolution in space, in building constellations of thousands of satellites at speeds far faster and at costs far lower than anything seen before, to make a quantum leap in global connectivity and access. Inspired by visionaries like Henry Ford, we made the bet of producing satellites like we build cars and airplanes, on high-volume automated production lines. And today, we can produce 2 satellites a day. We designed from scratch independent and automated modules to build and test each satellite components. And today, costs, production, and testing time are minimized. And we give life to satellites in a fully digitized mass production assembly line. We wanted to create a modular and customizable satellite. And today, we can adjust our design for innumerable configurations to meet all the needs. We decided to integrate non-traditional partners, but with solid industrial heritage. And today, we combine the best of space together with the most innovative manufacturing technologies. We brought together a handful of creative people to change the way we think. And today, we are more than 200 people from broad backgrounds working together to realize the revolution in space. The world moves fast. We move faster. 3 years ago, we sought to create a new industry. And today, we're ready. Today, we're on the firing point, ready to take on all the new businesses and challenges. This is the story of a revolution in space.
Bienvenue and welcome to Kourou, the end of the beginning, a next step for our new space endeavor. Our Airbus OneWeb Satellites joint venture is just over 3 years old, and what we have accomplished is incredible. We started from a concept, and today we launch our first satellites. I'm proud of our team. They have worked tirelessly to realize this. And as you saw in the video, we are transforming the space industry. OneWeb, Airbus, and our industry partners are part of this story. Together, we are defining a new future in space, opening access to all, and building a new space ecosystem. Part of our DNA is captured in the words of a famous philosopher. Do or not do, there is no try. Join us. Congratulations, everyone, and bon voyage, F6.
And there they are, the guys who we've been hearing from, sitting in the Mission Control Centre. The two from Airbus OneWeb Satellites, the manufacturers who've been incredibly innovative in building our first 6 satellites. So the frigate upper stage is scheduled to switch its engine on in just under a minute. So we are scheduled to be in the second pre-burn phase. We're having another catch-up moment. And if you look at the top right-hand side, well, let's just tell everybody what a catch-up moment is, as David explained earlier.
So this is, as I said earlier, you thrust a little bit to move the fuel to one side, just like giving the bottle of ketchup a good shake so that you can get it out of the hole properly.
Scheduled frigate second ignition. That means it's scheduled to switch its engine on again, and that's what it looks like. Frigate at that upper stage there, the gold structure with the spherical tanks on it. Some of those containing fuel and some of them containing things like avionics, kind of things that you find on an aeroplane. It was originally designed as an interplanetary probe, and it was adapted to fly on Soyuz, David. It can take its passengers pretty well anywhere they want to go, and it can actually switch its engine on up to 20 times.
And that's very important for the OneWeb dispenser. In this case, we're dispensing 6 satellites, but in the future, we'll be dispensing much more than that. And as we dispense the satellites a few at a time, it's important to thrust between releasing the satellites so that you can put a little bit of distance and put a little bit of velocity difference between the satellites to ensure that they are not at any risk of coming too close together, and to also space them out a little bit when they fly over the telemetry station for the first time in the North Pole.
Make sure that they don't bang into each other. And on the top right-hand side of the screen, you can see we're really climbed up to space now. Though we took a steep climb at the beginning, then we dipped down a bit. That's called the roller coaster phase, where we lose a bit of altitude in order to gain speed so that we can climb higher later in the flight. And now we've come up to a sort of a plateau-y kind of area, which means that we're on our orbit. If you look at the bottom left-hand side of your screen, our altitude is 1,000 kilometers above our Earth, and that is what we call our separation orbit. So we are now coasting without the engine. Frigate's getting ready to release the first 2 satellites. He's telling us that everything's going according to plan. We need to position them very precisely, David. We're going to release 2 and then 4. Why is that? How does that work?
So we would normally be releasing 4 at a time. In this case, we have 6 satellites, so we have to release 2 first and then 4. And the reason that you want to release multiple satellites at the time is just to reduce the amount of time it takes to get all of the satellites off the dispenser. So you don't want to release them all at once because they're too close together and they sort of will travel in a big heap over the North Pole. But if you release them one on the time, this mission would take a very, very long time to complete. And so we had to balance between getting things out effectively but doing it safely.
Just let's run through those speeds and altitudes again. Our distance in the middle.
Confirmation de l'extinction.
And he has confirmation there of the switch off of the upper stage. Just the distance is as if you were to draw a straight line from the pad to where the launcher is. And you can see we've travelled over 16,000 kilometres. And he's telling us that we're going into an orientation manoeuvre. Now, Andreas Dulvaris, who we've seen earlier, he's in charge of getting ready for today from OneWeb's side.
As we embark on this historic journey, I would like to thank all of those who have made this day a reality. I have been extremely pleased with how smooth this campaign has gone, which is a testament to all the hard work that people have put into the preparation for the launch campaign. I would like to thank the OneWeb satellite team, a joint venture between OneWeb and Airbus Defence and Space. Without them, we would not be here. They have truly done an amazing job in not only designing the satellite, but designing the first ever satellite production line that will be used to manufacture over 600 satellites. This is revolutionary in the space industry. I would like to thank the CSG staff for their support and cooperation, as their facilities and safety support are a critical element for a successful launch. Finally, I would like to thank our strategic partners, Arianespace and Arianespace Linköping, as they are critical members of the OneWeb team. This is not your typical launch service provider-customer relationship. This is much more. Both Arianespace and Arianespace have not only designed the first ever smart dispenser, but have been integrated in the OneWeb factory and responsible for the integration during the launch campaign. Today, we start this historic journey by launching 6 OneWeb satellites into a 1,000-kilometer circular orbit. Once we reach this orbit, the RUAG Smart Dispenser will deploy the first 2 satellites approximately 1 hour after launch. Then the remaining 4 OneWeb satellites approximately 20 minutes later. After the satellites are deployed, they will turn on and autonomously transition to a sun-pointing attitude. From there, the fleet management team will transition the satellites to the mission Earth-pointing orientation. Once the satellites are ready, they will be ascended to the mission orbit of 1,200 kilometers, which should take approximately 60 days, after which the satellites will go through a commissioning campaign, making them ready for use.
And there's Andreas in the Mission Control Center.
So that's a great reminder for me. I mean, I've been mostly on the side of developing the communication systems, and one of the great things about OneWeb is that you get to a point like this and you find that for 3 years somebody who's working tirelessly to develop an amazing piece of technology that you didn't even know you needed, and here it is all ready to go. And just the skill and the professionalism that everyone has brought to this, that it just comes out of the woodwork, it seems like, you know, just from that section. And so it's been great to see this day and to understand what Andreas has been doing sitting there for the last 3 years, because I never really fully understood it before.
Well, now you're getting a better idea, and I have to say, I mean, I think it's a feat of human engineering, really, what the teams do in the world of space engineering, because you know, it's so innovative and so remarkable. And there's Greg Weiler, who founded the company, I believe. So we're now in the orientation phase. What's happening here is we're getting closer to releasing our satellites. The upper stage, the frigate. Oh, and here we are. Look, we have the scheduled moment
yes.
for those first 2 satellites to be released.
So you can see them moving away from each other, and that's to give them to make sure that they spend as much time as far away from each other as possible. That puts them in very slightly different orbits to avoid the possibility of them getting too close.
And you can see there the trapezoid or trapezoid shape of them, a little bit like the corn on the cob, and you can see how that makes them fit very nicely onto this very specially designed dispenser. The dispenser being that tube in the middle, designed to host the satellites, but also to release them. So it's a very clever piece of kit. So we are going to wait for the confirmation of that separation, which our range operations manager gives us. And while we're waiting for
Confirmation de la séparation des 2 premiers satellites OneWeb, position 4 et 8, rang C.
And he's confirmed that we have separated your first 2 satellites, David. So that's a good start. We still have, and everyone's very happy there in Mission Control. And I can tell you that David's got a big smile on his face too.
So just so everybody knows, those 2 satellites were SherpaSat, named by the school in Nepal, and ChuSigSat, named by the school in Ecuador.
Great. And we still have 4 satellites attached, so obviously we're going to be waiting. We have to release those, and then we'll need to go into the tracking station to pick up their signal. But let's just talk a little bit about what's happening to our first 2 satellites now, David. Who's flying them? What's happening?
So right now they're on their own because they have been released from the dispenser and they have not yet come in contact with our telemetry and control station. And fortunately, they know exactly what to do. So they have been powered down. The onboard computers have been completely powered off to save the battery charge on the satellite while they've been waiting for launch. Now that they've been released, they will turn on, the onboard computer will turn on, and the first thing that it will do is run some current through a wire, which will melt it and release a very, very clever spring mechanism, which will release the solar panels. The next thing that it will do is it will decide that it needs a nice suntan, and it will go into sun pointing mode, and it point its body so that it's getting the maximum amount of solar radiation so that it can maintain a positive charge on the battery. And it'll wait there, and it'll wait until it flies over the telemetry and command, at which point our fleet operations team will get in touch with it and tell it what to do next.
So it's sunbathing. They're sunbathing.
They are sunbathing right now, which is funny because it's very cold up there, but it's very sunny as well.
And Arianespace is very well equipped to launch constellations of satellites. They have lots of experience already.
Contract was signed between Arianespace and OneWeb in June 2015 for 21 Soyuz launches. We are now about to place into orbit the 6 first OneWeb satellites. On top of offering a highly reliable launch solution, Arianespace was chosen by OneWeb for its team's ability to work on complex projects, including the development of innovative solutions such as the specific OneWeb dispenser system. A dedicated organization has been set up in Arianespace to meet the many challenges of the program and to be able to ensure 1 launch per month during the deployment phase. Regarding launch vehicle, Soyuz was the adequate solution to answer OneWeb requirements to deploy about 650 satellites within a 2-year period timeframe. Soyuz launch vehicle fitting to Constellation's need has been already demonstrated with more than 15 launches performed to low Earth orbit missions for other Constellation's programs. The frigate upper stage versatility associated with the dedicated dispenser allowed to perfectly answer to the OneWeb mission requirements. Arianespace and Starsem offer was based on the capability to operate the Soyuz launch vehicle from 3 launch pads, 1 in French Guiana, 1 in Kazakhstan, and 1 in Russia. This unique opportunity provides higher flexibility and reliability for the benefit of OneWeb. Launching from different launch sites will secure the deployment schedule, which is key to OneWeb, and this without preventing to serve other customers. Soyuz frigate proven industrial production capability was also essential to select the launch vehicle. The OneWeb demand led to almost double the standard production rate for a while. Only Soyuz frigate could meet this very demanding challenge.
Arianespace led the development of a new dispenser under OneWeb dedicated contract. This activity has been entrusted to Arianespace at Lidköping, Sweden. The main characteristic of OneWeb dispenser is to carry up to 32 satellites at a time and to separate them 4x4 with great accuracy. To answer OneWeb requests, new solutions were mandatory. Innovative technology was applied to trigger up to 256 redundant initiators, managing the smooth activation of the 4 connecting bolts of each spacecraft. Pre-integration of satellite on the dispenser at the factory to shorten the activity at the launch sites, allowing the high launch rate of 1 per month requested by OneWeb. OneWeb dispenser is a flexible and modular product. This made very easy its adaptation to the specific configuration of VS21 with 6 spacecraft and 4 mass simulators. In the same way, we are currently expanding its capacity to 36 satellites for the next flights. Finally, I would like to highlight the very good collaboration between OneWeb, Arianespace and Arianespace, which allowed to develop an innovative product answering challenging specifications.
Innovative indeed, and we have confirmation that the first 2 satellites have been separated from the dispenser, that tube in the middle, the cob in the corner on the cob, and they've moved away. Their next phase is sunbathing with their solar panels out in order to capture the rays from the sun and create electricity so that they can function. Now, Arianespace is, as we've heard, very, very expert at launching constellations. And just quickly before we go any further, for anybody who doesn't know quite what a constellation is, it actually means we've got more than one satellite in space, like a constellation of stars. You can have constellations of 2, 4 satellites, and of course you can have 80, and of course OneWeb is going to be 600, going on to 900. Now, launching that many satellites is really quite an innovative thing to do for any launch provider. And as I said, Arianespace is an expert. We've actually launched 109 satellites for constellations so far. And joining me now is Wino Kernissen, who's the president of Arianespace Incorporated. Wino, thank you very much indeed for coming to the floor. Wino, that's an incredibly impressive track record, isn't it?
Yes, indeed. In fact, we've launched about 86 commercial satellites for constellation and about 23 for ESA and the European community. And we still have about, in addition to this, approximately 600 satellites of OneWeb in our manifest, we have about 20 satellites for other customers, like the European community, ESA, and SES, for example. So we are
going to keep your microphone close.
Okay.
Thank you, Wino.
We are indeed in the middle of this constellation, and we look forward to continue that.
Absolutely. And what makes Arianespace so good at launching constellations?
Well, let's put it that way. Arianespace is good at launching anything. But let's start with the constellation, since we're talking about constellation today. It turns out it starts with our relationship with the customer. And in this particular case, in OneWeb, I'm looking at some guys in front of me here. We were, from the beginning, I mean, when I said from the beginning, there must have been, I don't know, 4 or 5 employees in the company when I started discussing OneWeb with those guys. And we had meetings at hotels here and there because there was no office, obviously. So that's how it started. And over time, we looked for solutions for OneWeb, and we ended up having found that the optimum solution for them is the Soyuz vehicle. But it turns out we did look at the Vega vehicle. We did look at the Ariane 5 vehicle. And we hope that in the future, Vega C and Ariane 6 will be part of the deployment of this of the constellation and the future constellation of OneWeb satellites.
Well, all I can say is I think you must all feel very proud, everybody who has been involved in this remarkable journey and this remarkable project.
It's not only proud, it's just you feel that you have accomplished something. And I think everybody, most of the people at OneWeb here in Kourou, in Virginia, in London, they all must feel very proud about this project. I mean, when I said I've seen people working day and night on this project, literally, it's not a joke because different time zone and they're always available on the phone, and it is a very proud moment for all of us.
Wino, thank you very much indeed, and congratulations to everyone so far. We still have 4 satellites attached, and we're still going towards the separation of those. Wino, thank you.
Thank you very much.
Let's take a look now at some of the constellations, in fact, all of the constellations that we have launched.
Said she doesn't like sugar, so why'd you say the sweetness makes the lover? And then you told her she she doesn't like butter. So why'd you slime around under those covers? Melted through her hands and down the gutter. She's not biting 'cause she don't like it when it's red. She's not feeding 'cause you keep bleeding over her. You talk about the things you must discover. The cannibal that lies inside the lover. She's not biting 'cause she don't like it when it's red. She's not feeding 'cause you keep bleeding over her.
One minute and 1 hour rather, and coming up to 17 minutes now into this launch. Let's just have a recap, David, on what's been happening so far. We're basically driving with our taxi driver to the next drop-off point to release our next 4 satellites.
So that's right. So our next 4 and final satellites are going to be dropped off. And then after that, we're actually going to do a bunch of practice maneuvers to simulate dropping off a full load of satellites, just to make sure all the maneuvers work and the frigate performs as expected.
Should we just remind everybody of our flight path?
Yes, so we are...
where did we lift off and where are we going?
So we just lifted off. We lifted off from Kourou, here in Kourou, and we have swung around the Earth, and we are...
We went past, we headed up over the North Pole, didn't we?
We headed up over the North Pole.
Yep. And we came back down.
And then we came back down, and then we were just in contact with New Norcia in Australia, and we are swinging around under Antarctica, and coming up the other side back towards the equator again.
Now, right now we're outside the tracking stations range. So what that means is the tracking stations... let's just explain to everybody a little bit about telemetry, because the tracking stations have great big dishes, and they're kind of watching out, listening out, sensing the launcher as it flies over. The launcher sends a signal back down to the ground. How does it work?
So the challenge with this is that the spacecraft is doing something all the time. It's collecting data, it's got sensors, and all this is being gathered on the onboard computer, and it's firing things, and it has to get confirmation that things worked properly. But we don't have tracking stations everywhere in the world. It's very hard to put a tracking station in Antarctica, and so on and so forth. And so what happens is that the computer will store the information that it's collecting, and it will wait for the next opportunity to talk. When it comes into a tracking station...
You can see them there. Gallio here in French Guiana.
Exactly.
Bermuda we picked up. Then St. Hubert in Canada is one of the tracking stations.
Exactly. So you can see we were just under Antarctica. There's nothing in Antarctica. So right now it's storing up the data for what it's doing. And when it comes back over a tracking station, it will establish the communications link. And the computer up there will say, oh, I can talk to the computer down here. Let me send it all of the data that I've collected until now.
And sorry, go on.
So not just the frigate has has obviously telemetry, and we're using that for this mission here. The OneWeb satellites do the same thing. Unlike a geo satellite, it also will fly over Antarctica, and it's very hard to talk to a satellite there. And so we actually have 2 tracking stations up near the North Pole, one in northern Canada, one in Svalbard. Svalbard is a little tiny island north of Norway, above the Arctic Circle, very, very close to the North Pole. And it's a very handy spot for us because every orbit travels over the North Pole and is visible every time it goes around. And so our satellites, just like the frigate here, as they go through their mission, will gather data, will gather performance data, will monitor things like battery charge and temperatures and so on and so forth. And then when they come around again, that is our opportunity to download all of that data into our systems and really take a close look at how the satellite's performing and what its state of health is.
And of course, all the teams in those tracking stations along the flight path, they're listening in as well to the range operations manager here at the Guiana Space Center. Now, the telemetry is received here at what we call the CVI. These are teams who receive the information from the tracking station. So the vehicle sends the information to the tracking stations, who send it then to the CVI for them to analyze. They do various things. They use the information to see how the flight is progressing in real time. There's Claude Legrand, who we saw talking in an earlier film. And they also use the information to evaluate the flight, check it out, see how it went, and they use that information to optimize the following flights. Now, we also have a telemetry team in the control center in Moscow, the mission control center there in Moscow. It's called SOUP, and you could just see back there, they have really great big screens in their mission control center. I've actually seen those when I was doing astronauts launches, and it's really quite impressive to see an astronaut floating into the International Space Station on that great big screen.
Well, it seems to be a design characteristic because in our Fleet Operations Center in Tyson's Corner, we also have a very great big screen right now as well.
Oh, I'm glad to hear that. You know what? Something that always strikes me is that it looks like things are happening very slowly in space, but actually they're happening very quickly. We're flying very fast. Although we don't have our telemetry information on the screen right now, I'm guessing we're flying in the region of about 7 kilometers per second. Now, we are going to be waiting to enter into the telemetry station in Galileo, but this is the scheduled moment for us to separate the next 4 satellites. Now, this is what it looks like. This is the simulated image, the CGI image based on the predictions, the data that the experts have put into the computer. You could see them there moving away in 4 directions opposite each other, couldn't you, David?
Exactly, and it's a very nice configuration to do, as it keeps the satellites far apart. It puts them in slightly different orbits, and it's a safe thing to do. You'll notice we did not release the mock satellites. That's very important because they need to come down again. One of the things you said about space, where things move fast and things move slow, it's very slow if you're next to the satellite, or next to the dispenser, which has just released something at a very stately pace. If something comes in another orbit, it can be coming at a very, very high velocity and do an enormous amount of damage. And so keeping space clean is a very, very big part of the OneWeb mission. And taking this dispenser and the mock satellites and taking them out of orbit when we are done with them is an important part of this. And when our OneWeb satellites are finished, we will be, as we replace them and as they end of life, we will be taking them out of orbit as well.
Now, just to remind everybody, we're going to be going back into the range of the next tracking station in about, probably about maybe 13 or 14 minutes' time. Now, that tracking station's it's called Galileo, and it's the one that's here at the Guiana Space Center. So when we do that, we will have done a full lap of the Earth. But before we can confirm the separation of those satellites, we need to go back into that tracking station and as David was saying, the satellites will check in there. And this is the launch pad, David. This is you can just see there what's left over. Now I have to tell everybody that when I've been on this launch pad, and you can't see them very easily, but there are some bushes right next to it which are always green, despite being right next to a launch pad, which is remarkable. It's fully lit.
So one thing we saw today was there's railing. So you've got the rocket and you've got the flame pit, and there's a little bar across with a railing with these little struts. One of the struts had a large wasp's nest on it, which has clearly been there for many, many, many months, and it seems to have been there, sitting there very happily through multiple Soyuz launches.
Remarkable. And here is the launch. This was over an hour and 20 minutes ago now. It was really nice seeing it. We've got our drone there, which is actually a new shot for us. We haven't had the drone that close yet, so this is really nice to see this. You can just see, well, on the ground, the gantry. That was the building that was covering the launcher. Great shots there of those engines burning, boosting us away from our planet. And lucky enough to see those 4 boosters being jettisoned. Oh, I love that picture of the twisting and the turning. It's like a ballet, and it's all been very carefully planned. So, David, let's just talk a little bit about OneWeb and how it works and what it does. This is a field that you are very much an expert in. Why should anybody really care whether their connectivity is over satellite or over fiber?
So that's a good question, and the answer is nobody should care. People should get service where they want it, they get the kind of service and the kind of bandwidth they want, and it should be easy to get, and it should be reasonably priced. And they shouldn't have to understand if it's satellite or this or that. Really, a great system and a really great technology will almost disappear, and people will just understand no matter where I am. I can put down a terminal, I could put down a flat panel, I can turn it on, and it will find the satellite, it will get service, and I don't even have to, all I have to understand is that it needs to see the sky. That's all I need to know about satellite.
So how does yours look? How does yours work? Have you got what have you got, a box? Have you got a panel or a dish that you put on your building?
So we have a multiple. These are called the user terminals, right? And it's interesting to stop and think. We've got all the space stuff and we've got all the network stuff and all this big fancy equipment. But the thing about satellites, the end user doesn't see any of that, right? They don't need to know about that. I mean, they may think it is cool, like I do, and they'll want to know about that, right? But if all they want is internet service, right, they don't need to know about that. They just need to know that they have a user terminal. And for most people, that's how they're going to interact with the OneWeb system. And so we've put a lot of focus